Walk out to my backyard in late July, and you'll see something that shouldn't exist in a North Texas summer. Green, dense, 4 inches tall, no stripes, no clippings, no mower in the garage that's touched it since April of last year. The wife's friends ask if it's artificial turf. It isn't. It's a living ground cover system that was standard advice in seed catalogs from the 1890s through about 1947, and then it disappeared from every recommendation list in the country within about 10 years. I want to be straight with you. I fought this idea for a long time before I tried it. Stay with me to the end, because there's a specific square footage threshold where this system stops working, and I learned it the hard way on a 400 square foot test patch. Here's the thing. The authority that buried this isn't vague. It's a specific company in a specific decade making a specific business decision. O.M. Scott & Sons. The same Scotts that sells the bags of turf builder stacked at the front of every hardware store in America, printed a seed catalog in 1947 that listed Dutch white clover as a premium component of their best lawn mix. 8 years later, the 1955 Scotts catalog had reclassified that same plant as a broadleaf weed to be killed. Same plant, same company. 8 years. That shift wasn't botanical. That shift was chemical, and the chemical was 2,4-D, developed during World War II for chemical warfare research and commercialized for civilian lawns in 1945 and 1946. Once 2,4-D existed, the industry needed broadleaves in your lawn for the herbicide to have a market. Clover was the most common broadleaf in a 1940s yard. So clover became the enemy. Now I want to be honest with you. I fought this idea for a long time before I tried it, and I want to tell you why. For 25 years of running my own contracting business, my treatment programs listed clover as a Tier 2 broadleaf. That's what the industry training taught. That's what the product reps reinforced at every spring meeting. And I want to be straight with you. That's what my service revenue depended on. If I told a customer their clover was fine, I'd just talked myself out of 3 applications a year. I was right there with you. I sprayed it for a quarter of a century before I read the old catalogs. Here's the math on what that cost you. The average American homeowner spends $300 to $500 a year on weed and feed, fertilizer, and irrigation, plus 40-plus hours behind a mower. None of that existed on a 1930s clover blend lawn. The bill was invented to sell the cure, and the cure was invented in 1945. So let me walk you through what the catalogs were actually selling, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The plant is Trifolium repens, Dutch white clover. Not crimson clover, which is the tall, red-flowered cover crop you see in farm fields. Not red clover, which is the forage variety. Dutch white clover. Low-growing, small, white flower head. 3-leaflet structure. Perennial in every climate zone from 5 through 9. That covers about 90% of the lower 48. If you pulled a 1925 lawn seed bag off a hardware store shelf in Cleveland or Kansas City or Dallas, you'd see Dutch white clover listed right there on the label, usually 15 to 25% of the mix by weight. That wasn't a fringe option. That was the standard. Vaughn's Seed Store out of Chicago sold it that way. W. Atlee Burpee, the same Burpee whose name is on every seed rack at your local big box store today, sold it that way. O.M. Scott & Sons, yeah, the company that today sells you weed and feed to kill clover, sold seed mixes with white clover, blended in as a premium component. Read the old catalogs. They marketed clover as the ingredient that made the lawn richer, greener, and easier. They weren't wrong. They just got outmarketed by their own future selves. And that's exactly the kind of detail the modern lawn care industry would rather you didn't go looking for. Because the second you find one of those catalogs, the whole story falls apart. Now, let me tell you how it actually works. Because the mechanism is the part that explains why it survived the marketing reframe even when the seed mixes disappeared. Dutch white clover has a self-terminating growth habit. That's the technical term, and it's the most important sentence in this entire video. Once the plant reaches mature height, somewhere between 4 and 6 inches depending on cultivar and soil, it stops extending vertically. Period. It doesn't keep growing taller the way Bermuda does. It doesn't keep growing taller the way fescue does. It hits 4 to 6 inches, and then it spreads laterally instead of upward. Which means a Dutch white clover stand at the end of July looks exactly the same height as a Dutch white clover stand at the end of May. You don't mow it because there's nothing to mow off. The plant has already decided where the ceiling is. That alone, just that one biological trait, would have been enough to make clover the most popular lawn cover in America, if anyone had bothered to tell you about it in the last 70 years. Instead, the industry built a whole revenue model on the assumption that your lawn never stops growing, and you need to feed it, water it, and cut it on a weekly schedule from April through October. Clover doesn't play that game, and that's why you don't see it in the modern recommendation columns. It doesn't generate the recurring labor cycle the whole product category depends on. That's mechanism 1. Mechanism 2 is the part that floored me when I first measured it on my own backyard. Dutch white clover is a legume. Legumes form a symbiotic relationship with Rhizobium bacteria. That's a specific genus of soil bacteria that colonizes the root system and forms small pink nodules along the taproot. Those nodules pull nitrogen directly out of the atmosphere and convert it into plant-available form right at the root zone. The number in the published turf research and the agronomy texts is 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. Let me translate that for the average homeowner. A typical 30-pound bag of synthetic lawn fertilizer at a 26% nitrogen analysis delivers about 8 pounds of actual nitrogen to a 5,000 square foot lawn. To match what a clover stand fixes naturally on the same acre, you'd need to apply somewhere between 15 and 20 bags of synthetic fertilizer per year. That's $300 in product, minimum, just to replicate what one plant species does for free if you let it grow. I checked these numbers against the Iowa State agronomy literature when I first started testing this on my own lawn, because I didn't believe them either. They check out. The plant fertilizes itself. It fertilizes the grasses growing next to it, too. That's why pre-1950 clover blend lawns were greener than modern monoculture lawns, even before anyone had invented synthetic fertilizer at scale. The clover was the fertilizer. And that's another detail you won't see in any modern weed and feed product brochure, because the entire weed and feed category is built on the premise that you have to buy nitrogen in a bag. Clover makes the bag obsolete. Mechanism 3 is below the surface, and it's the one that turned the corner for me on whether this could work in North Texas. Dutch white clover sends down a taproot, a single dominant downward root, that reaches 12 to 24 inches into the soil profile under typical conditions. Bermuda grass, by comparison, has a fibrous root system that mostly sits in the top 6 inches. Fescue is similar. That root depth is the entire reason clover holds its green color when grass is gasping. I pushed my digital soil probe into my backyard last August, during a stretch of 98-degree afternoons, and at the 4-inch depth where the Bermuda roots live, the soil moisture readout was below 10%. The grass was straw-colored within a week. At the 18-inch depth, where the clover taproot is still pulling water, the readout was holding above 25%. Same yard, same rainfall, same irrigation history. The clover was drinking from a deeper well. That's why the catalogs in zones 5 through 9 listed it as drought tolerant without qualification. The taproot does the work, and the suppression piece on this one is simple. A plant that doesn't need supplemental irrigation, doesn't sell sprinkler systems, doesn't sell smart controllers, doesn't sell the monthly water bill the chemical lawn model takes for granted. So the plant got written out of the recommendations. And the irrigation industry grew up around the grass species that couldn't survive a Texas July without help. Now let's talk about the fertilizer line on your annual lawn budget. The clover hasn't seen a fertilizer application since I established the stand. Not a starter, not a winterizer, not a mid-season hit of urea. 0. 2 full growing seasons. The reason is that nitrogen fixation number I gave you a minute ago. Those rhizobium nodules on the root system are pulling atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and depositing it directly into the soil at a rate of roughly 150 to 200 pounds per acre per year. That's more nitrogen than I used to put down on a Bermuda lawn with 3 fertilizer applications a season. The plant is fertilizing itself, and it's fertilizing the soil around it, which is why old farmers used to plant clover as a cover crop before corn. Same biology, different application. The suppression beat on this layer. A plant that fertilizes itself doesn't sell fertilizer. The companies that built their century on bagged nitrogen had no business model in a yard that produces its own. The water bill is the one the wife noticed first. Our summer water bill in 2023 on Bermuda ran about $110 a month June through September. The summer after I converted the backyard to clover, that bill dropped to about $70 a month. Roughly $40 a month back in our pocket. And that's only because the front yard is still Bermuda. If I'd done the whole property, it would be a bigger number. Now multiply that across the country. $40 a month, 4 months a year, for every household running irrigation on a warm season lawn. That's the kind of math the chemical lawn industry doesn't put on the back of the fertilizer bag. And the mowing line, well, you saw the hook. The mower hasn't touched the backyard since April of last year. Not because I'm being lazy, because the plant doesn't grow into the cut zone. A grass lawn at 4 inches today will be at 6 inches in 2 weeks. A mature clover stand at 4 inches today will be at 4 inches in 2 weeks. The vertical growth stops. So the gas, the blade sharpenings, the Saturday mornings, all of that comes off the calendar. And the suppression beat is the obvious one. The small engine industry, the bagged fuel industry, the blade industry, the whole equipment supply chain. None of that survives a national shift to clover lawns, which is exactly the kind of thing you don't see in the standard advice columns. The 4th layer is the part most people who've already heard of clover lawns still don't know, and this is where my generalist credibility actually earns its keep. There's a specific cultivar problem with standard Dutch white clover. The appearance is uneven. The leaves are bigger than a grass blade. The flower heads, if you don't mow them, sit a couple inches above the canopy and look a little wild. For a lot of homeowners, that's a deal breaker. The breeding fix is microclover. 2 cultivars to know by name, Pipolina and Pirouette. Both bred down to a roughly 2-inch mature height, smaller leaves, fewer flower heads. The appearance is much closer to what your eye expects from a uniform lawn. They cost more per pound of seed, but the visual problem disappears. The second piece of 4th layer knowledge is for transition zone people. Anyone living between the cool season north and the warm season south, which includes most of the country between Kansas City and Nashville. In that band, you don't run clover alone. You run a blend. Roughly 30% Dutch white clover by seed weight, 70% tall fescue. The fescue holds the ground in winter when clover slows down. The clover fixes the nitrogen the fescue needs. The 2 species cover each other's weaknesses. That's a 1930s seed catalog formula, not a 2024 innovation, and I had to dig it out of a Vaughn's reprint to find it written down anywhere. And the third piece, clover lawns recover from foot traffic faster than Bermuda. The stolons reroot every 2 to 3 inches as they spread, which means a divot or a wear path doesn't kill the plant. It just triggers rerooting at the next node down. Kids on it, the dog on it, the wife's friends standing on it asking about the artificial turf. None of that creates lasting damage, which is the opposite of what you'd guess. And the suppression beat is consistent with everything else in this section. A plant that heals itself from traffic doesn't sell sod replacement. Now, before we keep going, I want to tell you about something. Everything I just showed you, the clover system, the living mulch principle, the reason a plant gets reclassified as a weed when the herbicide market needs it to be, that's one specific application of a broader system I lay out in my book, Larry's 30-Day Weed Kill Protocol. It's 88 pages, $17, and Chapter 5, Phase 2, the barrier system, covers living mulches specifically, including the clover and creeping thyme ground covers that replace the chemical warfare model with something permanent. If you're exhausted by the cycle of spraying and pulling and spraying again, and you want a permanent fix, not another tip, that's what's in there. The URL is larrysgardenbooks.com. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it, I'll be right here. If you're watching on a phone or a laptop, the link is in the description. Go ahead and pull that up now. No rush. All right. Let's get into why this got buried in the first place, because the economics are the whole story. 2.4-D. 2,4-D. That's the chemical. It was developed during World War II as part of chemical warfare research, and when the war ended, the manufacturing capacity didn't disappear. It got pointed at the civilian market. Commercial release was 1945 into 1946. The two primary commercial actors were Dow Chemical and the American Chemical Paint Company, and what they had was a broadleaf herbicide that killed any plant with 2 seed leaves while leaving grass alone. The technical word is selective. The marketing problem was different. To sell a selective broadleaf herbicide to homeowners, you needed homeowners to believe that the broadleaf plants in their lawn were the enemy. In 1946, the most common broadleaf in an American lawn was Dutch white clover, because it had been in the seed mix on purpose for 50 years. So clover had to be reframed. It had to stop being a premium ingredient and start being a weed. And that's exactly what happened between roughly 1950 and 1957. O.M. Scott & Sons led the reframe. Their flagship product, Turf Builder Plus 2, was the dominant weed and feed of that era. Fertilizer combined with 2.4-D in a single bag. For Turf Builder Plus 2 to have a market, Scotts couldn't keep selling clover in their seed mixes while also selling a product that killed clover. So clover came out of the seed mixes by the mid-1950s, and the marketing literature began describing it as a broadleaf weed. Same plant, same biology. Different classification, because the classification served a different product line. Now let me be fair to the counterarguments, because forbidden audiences see through one-sided pitches, and so do I. First objection, clover attracts bees when it flowers. And if you have kids running around barefoot, that's a real concern. The answer is real. You mow the flower heads off before pollinator activity peaks, and you keep them mowed during the months when foot traffic is highest. The bees move on. That's a solved problem. Second objection, standard Dutch white clover looks uneven, and a lot of homeowners want the uniform monoculture appearance. That's also real, and the answer is the microclover cultivars I named in the last section. Pipalina, Pirouette, bred specifically for the uniform 2-inch appearance. So both objections have answers, but they're rarely raised in the kind of context that explains the answers. They get raised as if they were deal breakers, because in the marketing logic that's been running since 1950, they need to be deal breakers. And here's the math on what that's cost you personally. The average American homeowner spends somewhere between $300 and $500 a year on weed and feed, fertilizer, and supplemental irrigation. Over 30 years of home ownership, that's $9,000 to $15,000 in line items that didn't exist on a 1930s clover blend lawn. The lawn looked better then. The bill is higher now. That's not nostalgia talking. That's the receipt of a paradigm shift that was sold to your grandfather and never reversed. Now stay with me, because I promised you a square footage threshold at the start of this video, and here it is. The threshold is a minimum, not a maximum. Solo Dutch white clover conversions need approximately 500 contiguous square feet to establish a stable stand. Below that number, you lose the patch. I learned this on a 400 square foot side yard test patch in 2022. The clover established beautifully in the interior. Thick, green, 4 inches. Exactly what the backyard does now. 14 months later, it was gone. Bermuda from 3 sides walked right through it. Here's the math on why. Clover spreads laterally through stolons, the surface runners that reroot every 2 to 3 inches. Those stolons advance about 6 to 12 inches per growing season. Bermuda runners advance 2 to 3 feet per growing season. That's a 3 to 6 times speed advantage. If your clover patch has Bermuda or St. Augustine on the border, the surrounding grass is closing in faster than the clover can hold the line. Doesn't matter how healthy the interior looks. The edges lose every season until there's no interior left. 2 workarounds. The first is the clean fix. Convert the entire lawn at once. No surrounding grass means no edge invasion. That's what I eventually did with the backyard. The second is for people who only want to convert part of the lawn. Blend clover with a tall fescue at 30/70 by seed weight. The fescue forms a defensive matrix that holds territory at the edge, while the clover fills the canopy underneath. The 2 species don't compete the way Bermuda and clover do. They layer. That's the blend I recommend for transition zone lawns where you can't, or don't want to, go full clover. And here's the measurement trick that goes with it. Once a month, take a thin probe. I use a soil temperature probe, but a long screwdriver works, and push it along the edge of your clover stand at 4 or 5 spots. You're feeling for the difference between clover root mass and grass runner mass. Bermuda runners feel like fishing line under the surface. You can map the advance before it's visible above ground. By the time you can see the invasion, you've already lost 6 inches. By the time you can probe it, you've lost 2. You won't find this threshold discussed in any modern lawn care literature. You won't find it discussed in modern lawn care literature, because modern lawn care literature doesn't acknowledge clover as a lawn option at all. The threshold can't exist if the system doesn't exist. Before I let you go, if today made you realize you've been fighting weeds the wrong way for a long time, the full system is laid out in my book, Larry's 30-Day Weed Kill Protocol. The clover lawn conversion lives inside a bigger paradigm shift, and that paradigm shift is exactly what Chapter 1 walks you through. Why everything you know about weeds is wrong. It's the chapter I wish someone had handed me 20 years ago instead of another bottle of 2.4D. 88 pages. No fluff. Not another tip. The complete protocol, start to finish. Head to larrysgardenbooks.com, or if you're watching on your TV, aim your phone at the QR code on screen. If you're on your phone or laptop, the link is right there in the description. Go ahead and grab your phone now. Take your time pulling it up. I'll be right here when you get back. All right, here's the takeaway. Dutch white clover was the standard component of premium American lawn seed mixes from the 1890s through about 1947. And then 2.4D made it inconvenient for the chemical industry to keep selling it that way, so it got reclassified as a weed and erased from the recommendation lists within 10 years. That's the suppression. Now you know why your grandfather's lawn looked different from yours, and you've got the spread rate math. 6 to 12 inches a season for clover stolons versus 2 to 3 feet for Bermuda runners. To decide whether your lawn is big enough to convert solo, or whether you need the fescue blend, or whether you need to commit to the whole yard at once. That's your call, not mine, and not the industry's. If this one landed, the next suppressed knowledge piece on this channel is corn gluten meal as a natural pre-emergent. Dr. Nick Christian's research at Iowa State. Another piece of lawn knowledge that got buried for the same reason this one did. I'll see you in the next one.